Good morning, Chicago. You're listening to Inspirational Perspective. I'm your host, Linal Harris, your very own life coach right here on WBON 1690 AM, the talk of Chicago. Inspirational Perspective on your radio is all about murdering mediocrity and living the best life possible. So as I ask you every Sunday morning, are you living the best life possible? And this is the place to be to explore that possibility. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm excited about today's topic because I'm excited about awareness. And as a coach, that's the work that I do, that I'm committed to, and that's providing awareness to my clients, providing awareness to anyone I have the opportunity to support. And today's topic is about exploring poverty and wealth. And it's an investigation into what I've learned and what I believe, based on what I've learned, is the root cause of poverty, why it occurs, and how, and if possible, how to escape the poverty vortex. And the reason I said the poverty vortex is because the more I've learned about the poverty mindset, the more I believe that in many ways it's a vortex, a polarizing vortex that keeps the person or the individual or the family or anyone who is suffering from poverty in poverty. And we'll talk more about that as we go. And it's also an investigation into wealth, right? Because I firmly believe that in order to really believe or really understand one part of a coin, you have to flip the coin and really study the other side as well. And so an investigation into wealth, how it operates to preserve itself, and why and how it's protected. Because it's kind of the yin and the yang. The more I'm understanding, it's very much the yin and the yang. You can't really have one, it seems, without the other. Or at least in the context of capitalism, which we'll talk a little bit about today. So I'm incredibly excited about today's topic. As always, I love to hear your thoughts, comments, and questions. Give me a phone call, 773-591-1690. For those of you who are watching the streaming show on Facebook this morning, if you know anyone who has had money challenges, who cares about their financial standing, then share the stream with them and tell them to join as well. And same thing for those of you who are listening. So, exploring poverty and wealth. Real quick before we jump all the way in, for those of you who haven't, and if you're curious about your life's purpose, how to live your life's purpose, and really looking for a way to completely transform your life, but more than anything, create a sense of peace and certainty, even in uncertain times, because you know who you are and how you should be living your life and where you should be going, join me this upcoming Saturday, April 17th, for the Discover and Live Your Life's Purpose virtual workshop that will connect you to your life's purpose and reason for being. You can get 50% off if you register now, and you can do that at linalharris.com. All right. So first, let me kind of set the context for, why I even wanted to have this conversation and why I decided to tackle this conversation. Now, initially, I wanted to talk about money. And I began to realize that, well, when you talk about money, what you're really talking about is a resource. And so if I'm gonna tackle money properly, and consider this like part one of a three-part series, if I'm gonna tackle money properly, then you kind of have to look at, well, what other resources are there outside of money that function in many ways like money, like that are finite. Time is a resource, right? Transportation, food, all those things are resources. And when we begin to talk about money, really what we're talking about in the context of all of it is how we gain access to resources. So I do want to start by setting the context that as we have this conversation, it's difficult to hold it just to money, because there are so many different resources that we have at our disposal, depending on our mindset and the context with which we think about it. For example, integrity and trust is a resource. And in some areas, some places, it's an incredibly valued resource over and beyond money. And then, in some places, in context, it's not necessarily as valued. And so, but it's still a resource, and it could be something that you don't have much of, or you really want more of, given your circumstances. Now, I'm going to start with this quote by Frank Clark. And what he said is, the more you learn, the more you earn. And as simple as it is, I do believe that. And that's what today is really about. It's really a discovery conversation. Because a lot of what I'm sharing with you all, I have to be honest, I didn't really fully understand like I understand it now until I really dived in and did the research. But here's what really got me into the conversation initially. What had me so interested in this conversation about, quote unquote money and how we think about money has been a few things. One, conversations I've had with my clients over the years, and am having with my clients now in the context of money, and noticing how they handle it. So that was like, this is interesting. And then even asking myself, how would I handle that? Noticing money conversations among family and friends, and how we think about money. But even more, one of the things I've noticed since I've launched the Slay Your Goals coaching community and membership, which, by the way, I launched the Slay Your Goals coaching community and membership because my heart would drop every time I talked to someone who was a member of my community, someone that looked like me, that was interested in coaching, interested in getting some level of support to really transform their lives. And when we got into the conversation about cost, they just couldn't afford it. And let me be clear, because when we talk about affording and money, like, we're going to talk about this as we go, but money's contextual. And often our thoughts and our story about money is what stops us from taking powerful steps forward. And there's some cases where people I talk to, that was the situation. Like, they had the money. It was their thinking about the money. But in other times, they simply didn't have it. It wouldn't have been a good, thoughtful financial decision. And so I created Slay Your Goals, a low-cost initiative, $37 a month, to support people like that. Well, over the last 5 years, since the inception and creation of Slay Your Goals and the Slay Your Goals community, as when people cancel, my team and I, we survey them. We ask them, why are you canceling? And one of the things that we found, and I'm going somewhere with this, so just please give me a moment. But one of the things that we found is that almost everyone, there are a few people who weren't satisfied, that happens, but most of the members were satisfied and are satisfied with the service. And we get emails like, Linal, thank you so much. The portion of this program that I've been a part of has transformed my life, transformed how I thought about goal setting, etc. However, as I look at my finances, what I've learned is that I cannot afford this. And this is not one person, but this is going on. As a matter of fact, 80% of the people who cancel for financial reasons. And so I'm sitting back and again, $37. And I realize I'm blessed. I want to be clear. I realize I'm blessed. And so how I frame $37 in 1 month might be very different from how someone else frames it. I get that. But what I'm looking at is the fact that these are satisfied people saying that it's having an impact and they're canceling. So this got me really curious about what's going on with money in our community. Why do people stop things or avoid things or cut off things that can help them when it comes to their money? And so here are a couple of things that I found. 2/3 of our population, based on research, is on track to become poor. Poor, when I say poor, like have less money than their parents. I'm going to say that one more time. All right. And this is based on research that I found in the book called Bridges Out of Poverty. As a matter of fact, Bridges Out of Poverty. That's the name of the book. It's written by 3 authors, sociologists and experts. Phenomenal resource, Bridges Out of Poverty. But one of the things that they talk about is how 2/3 of the population is on track to become poorer than their parents. Now, let's put this in context real quick. And you'll begin to really understand why I wanted to have this conversation, and I'm incredibly concerned for us, for our community in particular. When I think about my parents are in their mid-60s, okay? And, still relatively, quote unquote, young, you may say. My parents, I remember my parents, one of the properties they bought, I don't know the house we grew up in, how much they spent on that, but one of the pieces of property they bought, a 2-flat investment property, was $30,000. Okay. My father worked for United Airlines for as long as I can remember, for over 30-something years. And he was a blue-collar worker. And he made less than $60,000 a year and supported a family of 6. Now, they had investment property. He's also a contractor, owned a contracting business on the side. But let's say if he generated another $15,000 with, less than $65,000 back in the 1990s and the early 2000s, they were able, but really in the 90s, they were able to support a family of 6. Own a home, own investment property, own 2 vehicles, and live like the middle class. Let's say that. Live like the middle class. Now, if this stat is true, and it's saying 2/3 of us, 2/3 of the population is on track to become poorer than their parents, and our parents, my parents, I feel like didn't make that much money, okay? And when we look at inflation, right, the same building or the same piece of property that, my parents purchased back then is going for, 1,000% more, right? I mean, $300,000, maybe $400,000. Where are we headed financially as a community if we are not going to be financially better off than our parents? The outlook looks grim. It looks grim. Like, I just want you to think about it. Inflation, what's happening in the world now, the outlook looks grim. So this has me incredibly concerned about how we think about money. And over the next few weeks, I'll be having some experts on. Next week, I'll be having Lauren Williams, who's the founder of Worth Winning. She's a former Olympic gold medalist and now a CFP, a certified financial planner. And she supports people with their financial planning objectives. And we'll be having others on to have this conversation and continue this conversation about money and how we think about money. But today, I really want to drive a deep level of awareness. And so do everything you can to put away distractions, because you need to hear this. And again, as someone who I believe that my family and I, we're blessed, financially stable, financially secure, retirement in many ways handled. These are things that as I found out about them, I was like, wow, how did I not know this? And I'm so happy I'm in this conversation. Okay, so let's just set some simple context real quick. There are three economic classes. You have those who are in poverty, those who are in the middle class, and those who are considered wealthy. Now, let's be real clear. Those who are considered wealthy are making $10.3 million and above. I'm not setting that standard. That's the standard that I found in my research. Okay, a person who is considered wealthy is someone who is generating 10 or who is worth, and when I say, overall worth, that there's some liquidity there, $10.3 million, okay? And then anyone who is underneath that is considered middle class, whether you're lower middle class, in the middle of the middle class, or upper middle class. Anything underneath that $10 million mark is considered middle class. And then the mark for poverty is not necessarily defined. You're going to learn why. Because some of us who think we're in the middle class are operating in poverty. And this is one of the things that really concerns me. You have a poverty mindset, you have poverty habits, and you have poverty ways of being. And we don't know it. And this is one of the reasons why I wanted to have this conversation, because poverty is a downward spiral, you guys. And if we go back to the stat, 2/3 of the population is going to be poorer than their parents. That means that there's something happening where we're running into a setup. And it concerns me. There's a rise in gambling, and it's real subtle and insidious. I was watching the Knicks play. I can't remember who it was, but I was watching the Knicks play one, and Friday night. And as I'm watching, we go into overtime. I think RJ Barrett hits a shot, layup, sends the game into overtime. And all of a sudden, what pops up on the screen is a FanDuel gambling advertisement. And it says, hey, put your bets in for overtime. This is your chance. And it had a countdown. Okay? It had a countdown. Now, I don't know when it happened, but something must have happened in legislation where now internet gambling is legal and it's easy to sign up. And so all of a sudden, there's this explosion in conversations about sports betting. I mean, I can't go to the barbershop without people talking about what they won and what they lost, okay? And I'm going somewhere with this. People are betting on things they don't even watch. Case in point, I'm not saying any names, but I stepped into a gentleman's home, had a baseball game on. Like, when you start watching baseball, man, I don't watch baseball, but I put a bet on the books. I have to see what's going to happen. And so there's these insidious things that are beginning to sprout where there used to be some regulation, where there used to be like, no, you got to go to Vegas to do that. No, you have to go to the boat to do that. Now it's right in our hands, right there on our phones, and it's a setup. Folks, it's a setup. Like, it concerns me. It concerns me because right now you might be gambling with the house money, but it's only a matter of time before they put a hook in you and you're gambling with yours. But it's a setup. We don't see this. So let me say this before I continue. Because that's only one thing. The gambling is only one thing. It's just an example of what's happening with our economy and with the elites and how they're siphoning the little cash you have out of your pockets. Like, and when you begin to understand how the wealthy think, it will blow your mind, and we're going to get there. Now, let me say this. I got to share this disclaimer as we get into this conversation. Here's who I'm talking to. If you have a deep desire for awareness around your finances and you're willing to be in a difficult conversation that will enlighten you, that hear things about yourself, hear things that, may shock you, hear things that might even make you angry, but you have a commitment to long-term financial stability, a commitment to long-term financial freedom and wealth, then this is for you. Like, you want to hear this. Now, here's who I'm not talking to. If you've got it figured out already, you're making 10 million and above a year, you're worth 20 million or so. Hey, and I say something, you like, well, I gamble in there. I'm not talking to you. Like, please forgive me. Okay. But if you find yourself beneath that, right, and you've been having financial struggles, then I am talking to you only if you want to hear it. And if you really want to be better and you want to understand poverty, you want to understand the poverty mindset, you really want to get underneath what might be disrupting your ability to be financially successful and create more personal self-awareness regarding how you use and view your collective resources, then this show is for you. And if you're willing to accept what you hear and take appropriate action over time, because it's difficult to take a lot of action, but over time, then this show is for you. You might want to go get your notebook. But if you prefer to maintain and remain a victim, and you are triggered by any mention that you have self-efficacy, then you might want to turn off the radio right now, because this episode will infuriate you. All right? And at the end, my heart goes out to you, because that means you won't be able to shift the poverty mindset. But what sense does it make to be poor and mad? And I say that with all sincerity. I really do. Now, here's the reason I say it. Because as a coach, one of the things I found is money makes us really weird. I have clients who will talk to me about their sex lives, talk to me about what's going on and what happened in their past that they're ashamed of, well before they encroach on the money conversation. There's something about money. There's a certain way of being that we have with money that really makes us weird. Like, that's the last secret that we keep. And as I dove into these resources, Bridges Out of Poverty, another book named Money, Principles by Ray Dalio, the list goes on. Do's and Don'ts of Money by Susie Orman. I just really began to dive into money and make notes. I began to realize that the information is out there. And so there has to be a reason why we're not listening. And it comes down to mindset. But more deeply, it comes down to our money story. So when you begin to talk about money and finances, it becomes fascinating, mainly because our past as human beings has a clear connection with how we go about taking care of our health or how we go about our love lives. But when it comes to money and financial clarity, It's not that straightforward because a lot of us have come from poverty already, or come from very poor families, but we're no longer poor. Now, when you look at health, though, typically, if your family was unhealthy, you're likely unhealthy, and or if there are difficulty in relationships, you still have difficulty in like those things are still mapped. But there's something interesting about money where the mapping doesn't happen so completely. And to make the conversation about money and finances even more complex, there are others who have had a traumatic childhood experience and they struggle with poverty as children, and in all matters regarding their financial well-being. However, there are certain people who've had that struggle who do incredibly well. For example, you could have two siblings, and they both suffered similar trauma, whether it's financial trauma, physical trauma, whatever, yet one becomes incredibly wealthy while the other struggles to make ends meet. So what makes them so different when it comes to money? And how does money manifest itself for us? And why do the majority of people all over the world struggle with money? Like the majority of us, when it comes to money, we struggle. There's a struggle. Even if you're making well over 6 figures a year, the majority of people who make good money still struggle with money. Why? I'm curious about this. Why is that? Why is it that it doesn't really matter the amount you make? Why is it that the more I make, the more I spend? So it comes down to what I believe is our story. The story that we tell ourselves about money and about life. So how life goes for many of us, and this is not exclusive to everybody, right? But for the most of us, we're blessed. We live in what is considered, quote unquote, a first world country. Almost everything is handled for us: infrastructure, resources like food, water. All those things are cleaned and properly provided for us. At least, hopefully the water is. The food is not that clean these days. And so ultimately, whatever we're creating in this environment has more to do with the story we tell ourselves than the environment itself. And let me just hear me out. Some of us, we tell ourselves a story that life is a struggle, and so it is. Or life is a battle, and so it is. Or that life is hard, and so it is. Because we live within the confines of our stories. That's just how it goes. Okay, we live within the confines of our stories. So whatever your belief is about life and why you typically, whatever your belief is about life, that is how your money story plays out. Okay? Now, let me give you a personal example of what I mean here. On a personal level, one of the money stories I had from childhood was that I am not going to struggle financially. And this was created as a child, and I'm aware of the story because of the work I've done with coaches and therapy and things like that, and awareness work. But as a child, I would watch my parents kind of move, how they moved. And one of the things I heard often was, well, Linal, we just can't afford that. And I resented that. And by the way, my story is likely different from my siblings because I was the oldest. And so before, my family was a bit more financially stable, I was old enough to understand and realize that there was some instability, and I didn't like that. And so I made a story up to myself that I would never struggle financially. And however, I did map on the story that whether I struggle financially or not, I had to work hard. And I played that story out. Incredibly stressed out, anxious, man, in many ways, not really fully present to life, but I was making great money. I did not have a financial struggle. I had a life struggle. And this is what I mean about playing our stories out. I believed that, hey, I'm not going to struggle financially, but I also thought, like, part of my story was, but if I don't struggle financially, then I'll have to struggle with balance. Now, thank God I've broken that story up as well through lots of support and coaching and work, self-development work, but it was part of my story. And all of us have a story. And even now, you might want to think about, what is your money story? What is your money story? But I want you to think about the irony of having money you can enjoy, because that's many of us who aren't necessarily financially struggling. We are struggling with life. And so we find ourselves in a place where we're making money that we can enjoy. Or what about the money story that creates a reality that for as much money as you're making, you're also wasting that much money? Right? That's another part of the story. And it's also another part of the poverty mindset that we're going to get into. Okay. So I can continue, but there's a lot of other things I want to talk about. But we create our lives within the story that we tell ourselves. And this is the same thing, comes down to money. Now, I got this email earlier this week, and it comes from a motivational source. And it read like this: do you know the real reason the rich keep getting richer? Linal Harris. Put my whole name in the email. No. Besides interest income. No. Besides abundance, actually seeking them out. No. Besides me pulling strings for them. Right? The thoughts they think. Thoughts anyone can think. Thoughts that make all those other things happen. That's the reason they're rich. Now, I read that this week, and I was thinking to myself, okay, so thoughts create things, and our story, we basically live within our stories. Now, if I read that to someone who's in poverty, that it likely would upset them, because they likely would say, Linal, I think about money all the time. I don't have any. And this is why I really wanted to have this conversation, because what I got in my email is true, but it can also trigger us if we really don't understand the poverty mindset. Now, I want you to think of mindset as a cognitive frame. So let's get into this. I want you to think of mindset as a cognitive frame. And inside this cognitive frame is your thinking, like how you think about the world. So on one part of the frame is how you think about relationships and the knowledge you have. And I want you to think about, right, because how you think about a relationship and how you think about your knowledge is critical to your thinking. Because just because you know something doesn't mean you'll apply it. All right? This is the cognitive framing. On the other side of this, so if you draw a triangle, the top will be relationships and knowledge. And then maybe on the other side of the triangle would be resources, how you think about resources, or even your understanding and awareness of resources, right? Like connections are, people are resources. Technology is a resource. Information is a resource. But how do you think about your resources? What is your cognitive framing around your resources? Because many of us have things at our fingertips that we don't necessarily see as a resource because of our thinking. And then on the other side of this cognitive frame of this triangle is the demands of your environment. Now, think about that. Because the demands of an environment is what they kind of talked about, and I'll talk about this in depth later. In Bridges Out of Poverty, they talk about the tyranny of the moment, and how the tyranny of the moment, usurps most of our thinking. So in a cognitive frame, I could have knowledge about how to use my money. But if there is a demand in my environment that activates the tyranny of the moment, then my knowledge about money may never be utilized because of the demand of my environment or the demand of the moment or the tyranny of my moment. Now, the word tyranny sounds provocative, but consider that a demand of your environment could be to buy something you don't need. Again, we're talking about the cognitive framing. And that demand is being pushed into your environment through your digital device, whether it's your television, whether it's your phone, whether it's your laptop. It's the demand on your immediate environment and your thinking. And it gets into your cognitive frame. And so even though you have knowledge that you shouldn't do this, the tyranny of the moment is so real that you do. And this all is framed like your action or inaction based on the demands of your environment is all framed in a mental model of how you think. So I could be on the radio saying consumerism is what has us in this financial situation. And then you could go to the mall right after the show and spend thousands of dollars that you don't have on credit cards that you have maxed out, even though you have a desire to do better financially, because it comes down to your cognitive framing, your thinking. And until you become aware of how you think about money, you cannot transform your financial situation. Now, another way of thinking about this is to examine our mental models regarding money. I hope you're taking notes. Okay? So, we have 5 mental models in terms of how we see the world when it comes to money. There are internal pictures of how the world works that were mapped onto us as children. And so if mom struggled with shopping, daughter probably struggles with shopping, or son probably struggles with shopping, right? Because there's a picture in your mind for how things are supposed to go, how you're supposed to dress, what you're supposed to drive, where you're supposed to live. All these things are part of your mental model, okay? And this exists below your conscious awareness. And so when something like advertisement, which becomes a demand on your immediate environment, begins to push against your knowledge, well, I shouldn't spend because I have a budget, then what begins to win are the internal pictures. And that's what determines how we act. And so until we examine what's below our awareness, right? How I grew up, how my mom spent money, how my parents spent money, the stories I tell myself about money. Until I begin to examine that, then my actions with money typically are subconscious. Now think about that. Do you really want your subconscious mind to be handling your physical assets? Do you really want your default programming, your autopilot way of being, handling your physical resources? I don't know about you, but no, I don't. I don't. And so here's the other thing. Your mental model about money can help or interfere with your learning about money. And so for any dialogue about money to occur, we first have to suspend our mental model about money. Like, you have to be willing to give it all up for any learning to occur. The internal pictures, whatever it is, like, there has to be an opening to the conversation. Now, I'm sharing this because as we go into the next hour, I'm hoping that you're willing to open yourself to this conversation, really challenge how you think about poverty and wealth, and even challenge the idea or the ideology that you actually may be in poverty. You may be generating over 6 figures a year, but operating in poverty. What does that look like? Well, paycheck to paycheck. That's a poverty mindset. Like, like, again, this comes down to awareness. If you can be in this conversation, if you can actually suspend your mental dialogue and just be with this conversation, there's likely a breakthrough for you on the other side. Now, when we come back, we're going to talk about capital. We're going to talk about the definition of capital. We're going to talk about why race is even a thing, because it all comes down to money. We're going to talk about the economic classes and how the economic classes impact poverty. And then we're going to dive into the definition of resources. And I'll be sharing 11 resources with you for you to begin thinking about. Only one of them is financial. Because when we think about money and when we think about poverty and wealth, then we have to better understand how to use every resource available to us to win at this game. And so I'll be sharing that, the definitions of those resources, the 11 resources outside of just your money that help you become wealthy, and the definitions of those resources. And we'll talk about what poverty really is and the mental model of poverty and how poverty persists, but not just the mental model of poverty, but the mental model of generational poverty and how it impacts our health, how it impacts our brains, and what causes it. And then we'll dive into the mental model of the middle class, as well as the mental model of the wealthy. And I'll end the show at the top of the next hour talking about the hidden rules of class that you do not want to miss. Because there are hidden rules that actually point out a person who has a poverty mindset. There are hidden rules that actually distinguish a person who has a middle class mindset. And there are hidden rules that actually are driven and understood by the wealthy. So that's what we'll talk about when we come back. But more than anything, I'm just excited about the opportunity to share what has made a significant difference for me in my life, even all the way up to this point. We'll be back in a moment. Don't change that dial. Tell your friends to tune in so they can learn more about this exploration of poverty and wealth. My name is Linal Harris. I'm the host of Inspirational Perspective, your coach, right here on WVON 1690 AM, the Talk of Chicago. We'll be right back.
This is why you work so hard.
All right,
to pay
so
the mortgage.
what questions
Because
do you
home
guys
is more
have
than
so
a
far?
four-wall.
What thoughts? I'm curious. Talking poverty and wealth. And I'm just curious. So if you had a question, you put a question in, please just share the question again so I can check it out. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I see you, Coach Donnie. Yeah, I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about how you can have money and still live in fear of not having enough. And by the way, that comes down to your money story. As a matter of fact, many people who I've worked with or have coached who came from meager circumstances and they've generated some financial stability. Many of them have a story of impending doom, right? So it's like, man, everything is going well. I have money in the bank. I have a nice house. I have a nice car. My children are doing well, and they're waiting for the shoe to drop. And there's a conversation they're having in their mind about when will the shoe drop. And you don't even realize how powerful we are. We're creators. You will create the shoe dropping. And it's a context. It's a way of thinking. And so the beautiful thing about coaching is a coach can help you begin to generate and create outside that context by choosing a new context. But man, it's something. It's something to be with. Yeah, Lynn Richardson says paycheck to Monday, man. And man, I was reading Susie Orman. She was like, hey, like there is no financial stability until you have 8 months of your salary put away. 8 months of your salary put away. But these are things that we know, right? The knowledge. But then we go back to that cognitive framing I talked about. The demands of the environment are usurping them, right? I got to get those shoes. It's like, I know I got to put this money away, but I got to get this car. I know I got to put this money away, but I got to get the latest and greatest. And it really comes down to a mindset thing. And when we begin to understand it, when we begin to understand this, then we can and notice it in ourselves. Then we can begin to operate differently and take different actions. But it all starts in the mind. It all starts in the mind, you all. And that's why I really want to tackle this kind of this mental block and barrier, these mental models that keep us stuck financially. What's going on, brother? Tony, good to see you, brother. It's been a while. But yeah, invite your friends, share the stream. It's for anyone you believe can be supported by this. But again, my purpose is your success. And this one here, the more I learn about it, the more my heart just, man, it's like, ooh, this is why there's a cycle, man. The rich get richer, the poor get poor. There's a cycle, but it comes down to our thinking. And there's so much we don't know, so much we don't understand. And so anyway, I didn't realize that the station on the other side was the volume side. So hopefully that's not too much of a distraction. We'll be coming back from break in a moment, though. But I don't know, man. It's interesting. Talking about demands of the environment. Another demand on the environment is a friend getting something new, right? So I have this knowledge, right? We talk about cognitive framing. I have this knowledge regarding what I should or shouldn't do, right? I have a certain amount of resources, financial resources. Then a friend of mine purchases, this dress or these shoes or this coat, this jacket, these Jordans, whatever it might be. And that's a demand on my environment where I'm like, oh man, I should do that. It's like, it's not, I don't need new shoes. Like none of my shoes have holes in them, right? All of them function properly. Well, I don't need like a brand new dress. I have dresses I haven't worn. Nobody's seen. I don't need a new car, like all these different things, but a demand, like it feels like a demand on my immediate environment or the tyranny of the moment of, well, they may think I'm not as financially well off as them. I can't have them thinking that. And we make these moves that are really almost unconscious. And they lead to us remaining in that that poverty cycle where we can never get ahead and we'll never become wealthy that way. So, man, there's so many examples of this. We're coming back here in a moment. 8 months of salary between cash and investments or cash only? Cash only. Cash only. What Susie Orman says is 8 months savings, that is your emergency fund, that is not used for investment. You do not invest out of that fund. That's cash that is basically set to the side to sustain you in the need for sustaining. And part of the reason for that is because you really don't want to touch your investments you bought. Like that's one of the things that hurts us is, so okay, let's say I got 3 months salary saved and I start investing, but then something happens and I have to basically sell that investment so I can liquefy it. Well, okay, so it made $10,000 more than what I had, but we're like, oh, it's cool. But what we're not looking at is it was 10,000 up. A year later, it could be 50,000 up. And so you just took a $50,000 loss to save yourself because you didn't have enough money saved. It's all a way of thinking. All right, we're coming back.
1690, the talk of Chicago.
Yeah, Ernest answered it. 8 months of emergency funds, liquid assets, or cash available. That's right. He answered it. And then everything else, like anything else in investment, like that's an investment. You don't touch that. And there should be, we'll talk about it probably with Lauren Williams next week, but that's an investment. And so that's not on the table.
It's time for you to walk with greatness. Let's murder mediocrity. Play your goals, live out your dream. Right now, inspirational perspective. Open your mind to a better life. It's time to live. Let's find your purpose now. Inspirational perspective. Let's slay your goals, let your greatness flow. With inspirational perspective.
All right, we're back. You're listening to Inspirational Perspective. I'm your host, Linal Harris, your very own life coach, right here on WVON 1690 AM, the talk of Chicago. We're exploring poverty and wealth and the mindset of those who are in poverty and the mindset of those who have wealth, and driving some awareness around where we are. Very open and intimate inquiry into how we think about not just our money, but all of our resources. So I want to talk about capital. One of the things we hear often is that, the African American community does not have access to capital. Why is that important? And why is that a critical part of the conversation? And I'm kind of jumping here. I'll come back to what we were talking about in a moment, but the definition of capital is wealth in the form of money or other assets owned by a person or organization or available or contributed for a particular purpose, such as starting a company or investing, like venture capital. Okay. And the point of this system is to conserve, in many ways, the governing power. And that's a huge statement. But that is the point of capitalism, you all. It is to conserve the power of the governing elites. All right. And this is, socialism was the same way. It was to conserve the power of the governing elites. The system just didn't work. Okay. Capitalism seems to be a system that works. It has its flaws. But the problem with capitalism is it's like a ever expanding monster, right? It expands. I share, like, for instance, my parents bought an investment piece of property back in the late 80s, I believe it was, for $30,000, a two flat investment property, 2 doors, 2 units. That same piece of property, because of how capitalism pushes expansion, right? So it kind of continues to grow and grow on top of itself. Then that same piece of property is worth $300,000 to $400,000 today. Okay. But the point of the system is to conserve the governing power. I think that's important for us to remember. And I think that's one of the reasons why many activists are against capitalism, because they understand that in many ways, that if there's a group of people who are being subjugated, or and for example, those of us are African Americans, where we're discriminated against, that discrimination is often sourced through the economic cycle of that power. And so if you don't understand why some people are really against capitalism, that's why. Okay. Now, in this capitalist way of thinking, and we have to talk about this, right? Because this is how our country functions. The elites shape how we think, right? This is their system. And we just got to be with that, right? So let's just talk about it the way it is. The elites, this is their system. Capitalism is their system, right? So this is why we go to their schools. Like, let's just be with it for a minute. This is why we go to their schools. This is why we learn this system. This is why we put our money into their systems, because the only way to survive is to operate within this system, because it is a capitalistic system. Now, you have some who look to survive outside of that. And I honestly believe that one of the reasons why the Black Panther Party became such a target is because they began to, in many ways, create a system within itself. And our capitalistic society doesn't like that. And of course, they also were Black, and they also were changing things. But it comes down to money. You know, again, Dr. Martin Luther King, they assassinated him when he started addressing poverty. Okay, because it's a part of the system. So how do we escape this system? We have to understand it. And the elites shape how we think. Now think about this. There's an overwhelming influence that social media has given elites. And so now the elites can get right into your bedroom. They can get right into your psyche, because they'll say, this is what's valuable. This is what's nice. This is the type of lip gloss you should be using. This is the type of, wig or hair you should be buying, right? And they shape how we think through the influence of social media, advertising, and that's what keeps the system in place, right? Because as long as I feel that I need something else, it keeps my dollars going back into the system, so that way the system can operate. All right. Now, capitalism is a system that constantly expands. And for example, Christmas as a holiday has become an economic monster. It wasn't always that way. There was a time before the 20th century that Christmas was a time where families got together and they would just enjoy one another with food and drink. That was all. Right? Do the research. Prove me wrong. But before the 20th century, this is what happened. But then in 1914, before the middle class, started to exist in 1914. And part of the reason they began to exist is due to the corporate engine and the results of the Industrial Revolution. So the corporate engine came into place, and you needed people in cubicles and buildings to get work done. And the rise of the corporate engine came into being. And so came the rise of the middle class. The middle class did not exist, you all, before 1914. Okay, so then it came the rise of the middle class. And the rise of the middle class made it necessary where the elite said, how do we, the money that we're paying them, how do we get it back? Listen to me. The money that we're paying them, how do we get this money back? And so economic monsters began to be created, or capitalistic monsters began to be created, starting with Christmas. And what they would do to the middle class is create a frenzy that would put like major parts of the middle class in debt as a result of the fourth quarter that they had to pay off the first, second, and third quarter, only to do it again. Right? So they began to put the middle class into a cycle. So we're giving you money, but you give the money back. And then we loan that money to you and you pay it off. And as you start to come out of it, we then create another economic frenzy where you give that money back. Now, I just want you to think about your personal finances right now and how you may or may not see that cycle taking place in your finances. Now, it's not all of us, but some of us, you might see, I have these moments where I have money in the bank, everything seems good, but here comes Christmas. I got to spend the money. And so you feel obligated to go spend because that's a demand on the environment. Again, remember the cognitive framing we talked about in the first hour. It's a demand on your environment, regardless of the knowledge you have about money. And that demand usurps your ability to save your money because you have to go get presents. You go get presents, you go into debt, you spend the first, second quarter getting out of debt, and it's a cycle. You never get ahead. Now, that's the middle class, okay? That's what they did to the middle class. We'll give you the blessing of money as long as you give it back, right? Now, here's how the wealthy think. It's all about inheritance. Ernest doesn't know this, but I'm trying to get him on the third part of the series. So if you're listening, brother, keep your ears peeled because I want to talk about inheritance. And inheritance is a part of the formula for the wealthy. And this is how they keep everything going. So while we're functioning our cycles, Christmas, things like that, they're thinking about what can I pass down to solidify the wealth of my family name. Now, while that's happening in the middle class, 2/3 of us are on track to become poorer than our parents because our parents aren't passing anything down. Again, the three economic classes: poverty, the middle class, and the wealthy. All right? Okay, so now let's talk about the three economic classes because the first economic class is the individual. All right? You. And how you operate and how you spend your money. You are economic class. The second economic class is the institution. All right? And the institution is the banks, etc. Okay? The banks, the insurance companies, you name it, that's a different economic class. And then you have the third economic class, which is your community. All right? And I'm sharing this because just in the framing of how we think about money, this is going to be important. I'm going to refer back to it. Okay? Now, there are also more resources than just money. And this is really, really important. There are 11 resources that we have at our disposal that determine whether we're operating with a poverty mindset or a wealth mindset. Now, let me talk about the definition of what I mean by resources. The definition of resources is, well, let me go through the 11 resources real quick and define those so you can better understand resources overall. All right. So, resource number one, we already know. It's a financial resource, money. Being able to purchase goods and services so we can sustain ourselves. All right. So money is one of the 11 resources. Now, I want you all to listen to these other resources and listen well. Okay? Because this is the part that many of us are not leveraging to create wealth in our families and in our lives, that once we know it, and knowledge changes everything, we can begin to leverage it. All right? Your emotions are a resource, folks. How you feel is a resource. It is either working for you or it's either working against you. It is either working for your family or it's working against your family. It is either allowing your family to stand on a solid financial ground, a solid ground, period, or it's keeping your family in a tailspin. Some of us as married couples, because we're not controlling our emotions, we cannot move forward financially because we can't even have a financial conversation. Because we don't realize that our emotions are a resource. Being able to choose and control my emotional responses, particularly to negative situations, without engaging in self-destructive behavior. Let me tell you something. You can have money in the bank right now. Okay? But if you don't have emotional control, then you have a poverty mindset. Man, so I'm reading this book, Bridges Out of Poverty. It breaks down how people who are in poverty think about marriage. Like, number one, people in poverty don't really get married, right? Because the person they're with becomes their possession. And so people in poverty think about people as possessions, right? This is why you mess with a poor man's woman, he will kill you, okay? That's his possession. He don't have much, don't mess with her. You got it? Right? It's a different mentality. In the middle class, right, we think differently. And so, you know, the spouse does something and we're like, oh, my feelings are hurt. I can't be with them anymore. I'm leaving, right? And we divorce. The wealthy, they're like, well, what's this going to cost me? What is this going to cost us? And how does this change our family? It's a completely different way. They understand, man, the resource. Like, I got a client, wealthy mindset. And she learned her husband had stepped outside the marriage. Wealthy mindset. Her mindset wasn't, I'm leaving. Her mindset was, whoever it is doesn't get to have him because he is an asset to this family. And so she placed new limitations on him. Like, if you want to be married to me, here are the limitations, right? You can't do that. And, right, I'm just saying something here, right? And you got to stop that over there, and we're going to fix this. Because what I'm not going to do is be lonely and broke. It's just a different mindset. I'm just using these as examples. Okay, let's keep going. My wife is laughing in the stream. You don't got nothing to worry about, babe. I'm just talking about mindset. All right. Another resource, so financial, emotional, resource 1 and 2. Resource 3, mental. Having the mental abilities and acquired skills to deal with daily life. That's a resource. Okay? Your mental abilities are a resource. Your ability to deal with life on a daily basis is a resource. Okay? Number 4, spiritual. Believing in divine purpose and guidance is a resource. I'm not saying it, like, I'm not saying this, right? This is what I'm reading out of the book, right? Your spiritual connection is a resource. If you don't have that, you're missing one of the fundamental resources you need. Your physical health, right, is a resource. And let me tell you, there's nothing that can steal your wealth like a lack of health. Your health is a resource. When we talk later about poverty and the poverty mindset, one of the things that's associated with poverty is a lack of health. Right? Those who are typically poor or are in poverty or have poverty mindsets are not in good health. Hey, one of the things that's happening in the middle class, especially in our community, we're making more money than we ever have, but we're also the most unhealthy we've ever been. It's that mindset is still operating. We don't understand that health is a resource. Your physical health is a resource. Support systems, having family, friends, backup resources that can support you, external resources that can support you, attorneys, financial planners, all these support systems are resources. And then your relationships, having frequent access to mentors who can nurture you, who do not engage in destructive behavior but lift you up. Those type of relationships and role models are a resource. And your knowledge of the hidden rules that I'm going to share at the end of the show becomes a resource. What are knowledge of the hidden rules? Knowing the unspoken cues and habits of a group, the poverty group, the middle class group, and the wealthy group. Look, man, I'm just trying to help. Okay. Get this. Integrity and trust is a resource. Your word is good. You do what you say you will do, and you are safe. Right? That's a resource. Motivation and persistence is a resource. You have the energy and drive to prepare, plan for, complete projects, jobs, and personal changes. Like motivation is a resource. Persistence is a resource. And then last but not least, your formal register. What is that? You have the emotional control, vocabulary, language, and ability, and negotiation skills to succeed at school, when you're getting an education, and in any work setting. All right. Those are the resources. Now, just be clear, I'm not like, this is not stuff I made up. This is research I've done, okay? All right, so what is the definition of poverty, so we can be clear? Well, the definition of poverty is a state of being extremely poor, and a state of being inferior in quality or having insufficient amounts of money. Okay, and that's Merriam-Webster. Now, the state of being extremely poor. Now, let's go back to these resources. That's poverty, right? The state of being extremely poor. So just because you may have a financial resource or pool doesn't mean that you're not in a poverty mindset. Because if you're poor emotionally, you're in trouble, right? If you're poor mentally, you're in trouble. If you're poor spiritually, you're in trouble. If you're poor physically, hear me out, you all. If you're poor physically, you are in trouble. That is, your health is a currency. I know we want to ignore it, but your health is a currency, okay? If you're poor in support systems, then that's poverty. If your relationships are poor, that's poverty. If you don't know the hidden rules, it's likely you're operating in poverty. If you don't operate with integrity and trust, you're headed towards poverty if you're not there already. If you have low levels of motivation and persistence, that's poverty. All right. Now, here's a key point. Generational and situational poverty are different. Generational poverty is when grandma was poor, mama was poor, and now I'm poor. Okay, that's generational poverty. Situational poverty is when a recession hits. And, my family has done fairly well, generation over generation. Maybe we have backgrounds of being doctors and lawyers and things like that. But a recession hits and our wealth in the stock market, our wealth in other vehicles is wiped out. And we have to wait for it to come back. That's situational poverty. Very, very, very different. Okay. And then you have the middle class. And then you have what is called new money, right? New money. So I'm making 10 million more, but I'm first generation. That's new money. And then you have what you call old money. And everything that is operating on the foundation of old money. What do you mean? What do I mean by that? The land, the banks, those are like the major resources that is sourced by old money. All right. So it's important for us to understand that. So let's talk about the mental model of poverty. Now, when you think about someone who is in poverty, the main currency that they live with or they live on or that sustains them is their relationships. All right. And this is one of the reasons why people become a possession. And I'll talk more about when we break down the hidden rules. I'll break down for you how each of these categories are seen from poverty to middle class to wealthy. But the mental model of poverty is everything is time based or conflicts with time. Let me give you an example. My barber and I, we were talking yesterday because I was explaining some of this to him, and he's like, "What are you talking about on the show?" And I was sharing with him the topic, and we began to talk about the mental model of poverty and how it works. And so I was giving him an example. This is the example I gave him. I said, "So today," I told him, "Today what I did is, I woke up late, played with my son. After I played with my son, went through my routine, right? Juiced some celery, ate breakfast. My wife and my son had somewhere to go. And then I began doing some work, preparing for the show. I went to the barbershop." Now that seems fairly simple, but if you're in poverty, number one, like juicing celery doesn't happen, right? Like what you eat for breakfast might be very different than what I ate for breakfast. So already, like my thinking, my clarity, all those things may be impacted, right? But then let's just talk about going to the barbershop. Now my barber's a 5-minute drive from me. But if I didn't have a car, then I would have to plan how I'm going to get to the barbershop because I need a haircut for Sunday or I need a haircut for whatever it may be. So that means I would have to map out the buses. What is a 5-minute drive could take 30 to 45 minutes on the bus one way. And then 30 to 45 minutes on the bus back, right? Between the ride and the walking. And so all of a sudden, how a person in poverty thinks, who doesn't have transportation, who doesn't have access to some of these things, is their time is being, in many ways, like taken over by very simple problems. And this is why the poverty cycle is difficult to come out of, you all. And this is why people in poverty typically need some type of outside support to be pulled out of the poverty vortex. And this is important because I think sometimes, we may look at someone who's struggling financially and say, why don't you just get up and make things happen? And it's like, no, like it's much more difficult than that. The food quality they're getting is lower than the food quality you get. So there's a fogginess in the thinking. Simple things like transportation, childcare, schooling is like they're not being taught the way that you're being taught. And so this is why it's so important for those of us who have some kind of financial setting we put resources into our communities that need support. This is why. The kind of businesses you see in neighborhoods that are drenched in poverty. And so think about this, because you might be living in one of these neighborhoods. You got to start asking yourself, wow, what's going on here? Pawn shops, liquor stores, corner stores, rent to own, like rent-a-centers, right? Because, to go in and pay $200 for a table, I don't have $200. And so I'll end up spending $500 for the table because I'm dropping $25 a month. The laundromats, the amount of money that's spent at a laundromat. Like a laundromat is, for someone who has wealth, asset, because it makes money. But it makes money, like think about this, it makes money off of taking money or taking profit from people who are poor, who have no other way to wash their clothes and sustain themselves. So they have to pay a premium. Like think about this. They have to pay a premium to do many of the things that we do freely. I'm like, well, I don't do it freely now. I have to buy my washer and dryer. Yeah, well, one-time expense on a credit card. After that, you don't think about it anymore. Think about if every time you had to wash, you had to come up with $5. Just think about that. You had to come up with $5 that you didn't have. Fast food, payday loan stores, temp services for staffing, used car lots, dollar stores, all things that are in communities that are entrenched in poverty. All right. Now, the mental mode of generational poverty is, what's the best way to say it? It's a description, okay, of what feels like a concrete experience, right? Generational poverty. So once this becomes a generational thing, it's the only way to think about it is being born in a trap. Being born in a trap that your grandparents haven't figured out how to get out of, your parents haven't figured out how to get out the trap, and so they have no knowledge to pass to you for how to get out the trap. There is no future story, no choice, and no power. That is the reality of someone who is struggling with poverty, you all. Okay? There's no real answer. And this is one of the reasons why, the crab in the barrel is like, get back down here, is because they think that grandma didn't get out the trap, grandpa didn't get out the trap, daddy didn't get out the trap, or mommy didn't get out the trap. Because by the way, in poverty, poverty systems have a matriarchal system. It's run by the women, right? And this is how it is. Okay, nothing wrong or right about it. It's just how it is. In poverty, it's run by the woman. And so it's a matriarchal system. And so basically, you're born in a trap. Okay. Now, in the trap comes along with health issues. Those who are rich are typically healthier than those who are poor. And those who are poor are typically sicker than those who are rich. And living in poverty itself is a risk factor because of stress-related illnesses. There's been research that has been done that basically says that children who are born in poverty have increased hormone levels of cortisol, which is, generated through stress. And so that cortisol, these children begin to fall into the lowest brackets of brain development because of the cortisol. And so this is how it becomes a perpetual cycle, right? And I could go on and on about this, but ultimately, for instance, if the mother experienced high levels of stress during pregnancy, cortisol can infiltrate the placenta, interfering with brain development before birth. So this is how the trap continues. Okay. Now, there are many causes of poverty. I'm looking at the time. We're not going to have time to get into that. At the top of the list is racism. I mean, across the board, as I look at this research, across, like, at the top of the list is racism. And then discrimination by age, gender, disability, race, sexual identity. And then get this: bad loans, credit card debt, lack of savings, the skill set, lack of education, alcoholism, job loss, teen pregnancy, early language experiences or lack of experience, street crime, dependency on drugs, work ethic, which is caused by trauma, by the way, and lack of organizational skills. This is part of what those in poverty experience as a tyranny of the moment, you all. The need for them to act in the moment overwhelms any willingness to take time to learn. The fact that you all can sit and listen to me, okay? The fact that you all can sit and listen to me for an hour and 45 minutes is a luxury. People who are in true situations of poverty they don't have the time for this. All right? We're not even getting into, the fact that they can even follow, all right, due to trauma, executive functions, and ability to take notes being gone. All right? But the fact that you can listen to this and follow this is a luxury. This is why we pray for the poor. We give to the poor. And this is why this conversation is so important, because the better we do, the more people we can support, the more people we can help. Okay. Now, let's talk about the mental model of the middle class. Because some of us want to be wealthy, right? And there's a different model. But here's the mental model of the middle class. Everything for those of us who are in the middle class is based on achievement. Achievement within our groups, achievement for our children, achievement in our finances, achievement across the board, okay? Even achievement in sports. We have the time to think about those things, to achievement in our jobs, achievement at work, achievement with public action, right? This is why we begin to, say, well, I'm voting for this person or I'm supporting this person, right? Because we're looking to take things to the next level. The middle class, like, the focus is about achievement. In the middle class, our focus is on social services, how good our schools are, the functioning of police. Like, we get to march and no, we don't want this from police. Our religious organizations, everything is surrounding or supported by some level of achievement. When you come into our communities, you find shopping malls, bookstores, banks, fitness centers, veterinarian clinics, because we have money to make sure even our dogs eat well. Office complexes, coffee shops. Oh, I didn't get my Starbucks. Restaurants, bars, golf courses. Everything is around achievement. This is based on a model created by Phil DeVault. Okay. Now, here's the difference between the mental model of the middle class and the mental model of the wealthy. The wealthy, everything operates around connections. And see, so let me go back, because I think some of y'all might have been offended when I talked about how wealthy mindset, the husband cheats and they say, I ain't leaving. He got to stop that. I'm going to make his life a living hell. He going to stop this and I ain't going nowhere. I said, what's that about? Well, the poverty mindset is about possession of relationship. The middle class is about achievement, right? So it's about achieving things and moving to the next level. So we typically operate on either side of the spectrum. Like, either we have the poverty mindset around possession. So I can't believe you did that, I'm leaving you. Or a mental model of wealth where how is my spouse connected, and can I afford to leave them? We got to get this, man. I told you this wasn't gonna be an easy one, and I'm not promoting infidelity. I'm trying to get us to see the mindset. That's all, and that's what I'm trying to do. The wealthy, everything operates around connections. Everything is around connections. And again, you're not considered wealthy unless you have a net worth of 10.3 million or more. Okay. All right. And this is developed by Dr. Ruby Payne. They think about travel as an opportunity to connect. This is a wealthy mindset. Connect with different people, connect with new networks. Okay. They think about their work and who they do business with in terms of connections. Okay. And they think about, it's just, again, it's a completely different way of thinking, right? Everything is through connections, political connections, social connections. How can I connect? And this is what keeps them wealthy, right? Because their connections are about being privy to knowledge that will sustain their wealth. So it's a connection, like it's about connections. When I get to the hidden rules, it's going to blow your mind. It's going to blow your mind how the wealthy think. But when you go into a wealthy neighborhood, here are the businesses that you see. You see spas, private clubs to help them foster their connections, golf courses to help them foster their connections, plastic surgery clinics. Let me tell you something. You all notice how plastic surgery is making its way into the middle class? That's like an extreme luxury. But now we're like, oh, I'm going to spend $2,000, $3,000, $5,000, $10,000 on some lips. But I don't have 8 months salary saved. They have concierge services. I don't want to plan it. You plan it. They have pet spas, luxury car lots, personal shoppers, boutique shopping areas. It's not a shopping mall. It's boutique. Private schools, personal security, florists, party planners, upscale hotels, private airports, and upscale travel offices. And the wealthy also understand the hidden rules of money. I'm going to spend the last 10 minutes going through this. Get your paper out for this one. And this is, again, when it comes to possessions, the hidden rules of class. When it comes to possessions, people who are in poverty try to possess other people. Poverty mindset tries to possess other people. The middle class, they're working to possess things. And the wealthy, they're looking to possess one-of-a-kind objects, legacy pieces of art, and pedigree pets. It's just different. You know what I'm saying? Just different. When it comes to money, the way someone in poverty thinks about money is, I just got a stimulus check, I got to spend it. I got money, I have to spend it, because if I don't spend the money, I don't know when I'm going to have money to spend again. People in the middle class, how we think about money is, I need to manage it. Okay, so, all right, I'm bringing in $5,000 a month, $6,000 a month. Okay, so I need to, how do I get this? Okay, I get this kind of car. So if I get this car and I get this rent and I do this, that means I can buy that. Then maybe okay, I can sustain myself with this job. So we are constantly thinking about how we're going to manage the money we get. The wealthy, two things. They want to conserve the money they get and invest it. Conserve and invest. Conserve and invest. And by the way, you might say, well, Linal, then why are they spending money on all these nice things? Like even possessions come down to getting things that are assets. Legacy art. Right? The art piece costs $1 million today, $11 million tomorrow. Right? That's where they are. And then the boutique shopping comes from the excess that comes from the investments. Like, so for them, it's the excess that is spent on the luxury. Because anything else must be conserved and invested. Conserved and invested. How they think about, I'm skipping some things, social emphasis. In poverty, there's a social inclusion of all the people you like. Right? If I like you, you can come. You can come to the party if I like you. And in the middle class, there's an emphasis on self-governance and self-sufficiency, like taking care of myself and being able to sustain myself. Like that's my social emphasis is on my ability to sustain and govern myself. For the wealthy, the emphasis is on social exclusion. I can't be wasting my time with people who are not going to help me connect. Right? Because again, if we go back, like think about this, for the wealthy, it's all about connections. Right? So then if you don't have connections, then you're excluded. I only want other people who are wealthy, who have knowledge in my circle. Food, the question for people in poverty is, do I have enough? For in the middle class, the question is, do I like it? And the key question for the wealthy is, was the food presented well? It's just different, man. Time. For people who are in poverty, the present is the most important thing. And decisions made for moment to moment are based on feelings of survival. Right? So time is about right here, right now. Person in poverty, you can't be like, hey, you know, so if you go through this in the future, this is what's going to happen for you. How can this, help me right here, right now? In the middle class, the future is most important. Decisions are made thinking about future ramifications. And for the wealthy, traditions and history are most important. And decisions are made partially on the basis of tradition and decorum. It's just different, right? Education is viewed as abstract and not necessarily a reality that supports you in the present moment when you're in poverty. In the middle class, is crucial for climbing the success ladder and making money for achievement. And for the wealthy, it's necessary. And they're educated not just in schools, but also in the traditions of making and maintaining connections. Y'all noticing something here? Making and maintaining connections. This is why with wealthy people, money marries money. They like, oh, you like her? You know, you watch Pride and Prejudice, right? You watch these movies, and in Pride and Prejudice, the wealthy guy, I think it was Keira Knightley, was a peasant girl, and he notices her, and it's like this big to-do. You know, she's cute, but you can't mess with her, bro. She don't have no connections. Because when it comes to maintaining their wealth, it's not just about I love you or you look good. It's do you have wealth and do you have connections? Language is, for poverty, language is about survival. It's casual. For us in the middle class, it's, about negotiation. And for the wealthy, it's about networking. And you're seeing the differences here. Let's check out, there's a few, I'm skipping a few. Household dynamics. Check this out. Household dynamics. In poverty, it seems to be matriarchal. In the middle class, it tends to be patriarchal. And for the wealthy, it depends on who has the money. Whoever has the money runs the house. It's just, this is poverty, like exploring poverty and wealth. Okay? Worldview. Those in poverty see the world from a local setting. Check this out, those in the middle class see the world from a national setting. And the wealthy see the world in terms of their international view. International view. Poverty, when it comes to love and acceptance are conditional based on whether you're liked. Okay? In poverty. If I don't like you, I don't gotta love you. With the middle class, love and acceptance are conditional based largely upon your ability to achieve something. If you haven't achieved anything, I don't see myself loving you. And with the wealthy, love and acceptance, the condition is related to your social standing and your connections. Here's another really big one. In poverty, humor is about people and sex. In the middle class, it's about situations. That's why y'all love Kevin Hart so much, right? Because he talks about it's situational humor, right? And then for the wealthy, it's about social faux pas. There's a quote by Minaj O'Rara, and it says, "You don't have to be like most people around you, because most people never become truly rich and wealthy." Typically, when it comes to money or the perception of money, we're in a race to be like everybody else. And I love this quote because to really understand money and to begin to handle your money aligned with this understanding, what happens is when your cognitive framing and thinking becomes adjusted, where you do have access to your knowledge and you do have access to your learning, then those external demands, they're not as loud as they used to be. Because if I'm really truly all about creating a legacy and taking my family somewhere, doing something that will shift not just my family, but the community at large, I'm not concerned about being like other people. I don't have to drive like other people. I don't have to dress like other people. Because guess what? What I do know is most of them are not rich, will never be rich, and are not wealthy. I'll leave you with this. As someone who's worked with hundreds of people who have financial means, you'll be surprised who's got the money and who doesn't. And so at the end of the day, are you tending to your commitments and to what it is you want to create long term for your life and your family? Well, you've been listening to Inspirational Perspective. I'm your host, Linal Harris, your very own life coach, right here on WVON 1690 AM, the Talk of Chicago. Be blessed.
latest trial of the ex-cop accused of killing George Floyd.
All right, you guys, that's the show. There's more to go. Next week, Lauren Williams, we're going to be talking about planning. So now that we have the context of poverty and wealth, and we like, hey, being like other folks ain't going to get me there, right? Now that we have that context, now we're going to get into money mindset actions and planning and practices with Lauren Williams. Join me then. I think Ernest already committed to being here for inheritance. And so that's April 18th, April 25th. Stay here as we tackle money mindset to really transform something in our finances. Share the stream if you enjoyed it. Look forward to having you back next Sunday. God bless you guys.